Well, hello, fellow friends, our fellow neighbors, and our fellow shining stars. Our next trolley stop is here, and our next trolley stop is now. Welcome back to another all-new episode of PR from the Heart children's book Spotlight series. To be precise, we have reached episode number 197. The countdown is on to episode number 200 of the children's book Spotlight series, but we are fully enjoying our time right here on this particular trolley stop. Welcome to our neighborhood. My name is John Massalonis, the manager here at PR from the Heart and the host of the children's book Spotlight series. And then, of course, right on command, my faithful furry friend and companion, Little Forrest, always reminds me. He says, John, remember, I'm your co-host here. So we like to have equal footing here. I know, little guy. We like to have equal footing here at the children's book Spotlight series. And based on the timing of today's trolley stop, we're going to be having a wonderful time. And especially when we take the time to talk about messages and stories from the heart. And before we begin, many of you who are coming into our program, especially as we're counting down to the 200th episode of the Children's Book Spotlight series, if you are new to the program, one of the many ways that you can pledge your support is to subscribe to PR from the Heart's official YouTube channel and to share this very special trolley stop that you are now starting to enjoy. That is episode number 197 of the Children's Book Spotlight series. Be sure to like this particular episode, this particular trolley stop, and share it on your favorite social media platforms of your choosing. It is now just a few days away from the Super Bowl, from the big game. And being a longtime Buffalo Bills fan, it can bring up a lot of sensitivity on my end of things, especially when, this past year, the Bills had a wonderful team, and it was the Kansas City Chiefs that said, okay, Buffalo, it's next year. We've been, people who live in Buffalo and longtime Bills fans have been saying that for a long period of time. You have the Kansas City Chiefs and you have the San Francisco 49ers. Those are the two teams that have stood the test of time, at least for this particular football season. And here we stand. There's a lot of stories that you are going to be hearing in the media, whether it be about Patrick Mahomes' story or Brock Purdy's story or the love story that is Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift. Some people are probably calling this the Swiftie no doubt. But there are always the stories within the story. There are many players that will maybe only see a little bit of action during the big game that really have some of the most powerful stories. And there are some people just in life, not even on the gridiron, on the football field, there are many people's stories that were tragically cut short. But one of the powerful things that we can do as human beings, as fellow neighbors, is we can do our part to keep the memory, to keep the legacy, and to keep the life, the spirit of a particular person alive, even when they have since passed. And there's a beautiful heart, not even just a beautiful heart, but a heroic heart that we're going to be talking about today here on episode number 197 of the Children's Book Spotlight series. Many Kansas City Chiefs fans may remember this particular gentleman that we are going to be discussing and talking about, but many of you who are longtime football fans or newer football fans, you may have not heard of Joe Delaney. Well, today, here on the trolley stop, episode number 197, we're going to do our part in our own small way to be able to keep the memory, the legacy, and the life of Joe Delaney alive. And of course, there is a beautiful new children's book that is helping us to be able to do that. Courtesy of our longtime friends and neighbors at Triumph Books. We had the opportunities to work with Triumph Books eons ago, even prior to the conception of the Children's Book Spotlight series. We encourage all of you, our listeners and viewers, our friends and neighbors, and of course, our fellow shining stars, to head on over to Amazon.com and purchase your copy of Heroic Heart, The Legacy of a Professional Football Player. It is an illustrated biography of Joe Delaney. One of the many ways that you can pledge your support for Frank, for Charnaie, and the team at Triumph Books to let them know that they're doing wonderful and much needed work for children, parents, families, and educators is to leave a 5-star review for Heroic Heart. The trolley's racking up some mileage. We start off going from San Diego, California. We travel all across the country. When we're talking about February, we're talking about the month of love. We go to the city of brotherly love. Joining us as part of episode number 197 of the Children's Book Spotlight series. It's children's author Frank Murphy. And then the trolley goes from Philadelphia to the beautiful state of Connecticut. So we're bringing all different kinds of climates here on episode number 197 of the Children's Book Spotlight series. Joining us as well is Frank's co-creator, fellow children's author, Charnaie Gordon, the team that have brought Heroic Heart to life. Frank, Charnaie, thank you for spending some time with Little Forrest and I, and spending some time with us here in our neighborhood here today on Super Bowl week.
Yes, thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, John. I was really excited when you contacted us. I'm really excited to get this going and talk about Joe's life.
And it's so fascinating how the universe works. I really believe in life works specifically because, as the both of us had mentioned, we had the conversation before we jumped on the recording of this episode in the PR from the Heart Green Room. And, you know, having the long time relationship that I had with Triumph Books, and always fascinated to see kind of like what they're doing, even though, you know, haven't worked with the team at Triumph in some time. And then I noticed there's a football book. And wait a minute, it's not just a regular football book, it's an illustrated book. So it's like right down my alley here at the Children's Book Spotlight series, and learning more about your work and the fact that the both of you, who are very successful in your own right, you came together for a mission, for a common goal, and that is to keep the life of Joe Delaney alive. We always love to be able to talk about origin stories. We're big on origin stories here at the Children's Book Spotlight series. Before we dive into Joe's life and how it was tragically cut short, to be able to help us set the table, Frank, if you can start things off, first things first. For those who are learning about your work for the first particular point in time, can you share with us really where it all began for you in terms of your work for children as a children's author? Where did it begin for you? And then I'll ask and share that exact same question, Charnaie. And then, because I'm fascinated how the two of you landed up coming together to be able to work together on this project.
Thanks again for having Charnaie and I. So for me, this is my 32nd year teaching. I'm still teaching. I started teaching in the early 90s, started teaching second grade. And in second grade, when I taught second grade, I noticed the landscape was different then. There weren't a lot of great books about females in history and strong girls in history. And then even just interesting stories about people in history. So what I did was I just bought some blank books and started writing stories, researching and writing stories about Ben Franklin and a girl named Vinnie Ream, who was an artist during Lincoln's time. I wrote a book about an artist named Sofonisba Anguissola. Never had any of those books published about the females, but eventually after about, so I would write these books and I would draw pictures and have the kids in my class illustrate the pictures that I did, and then I would just put them on my bookshelves. So I was trying to find books that made history fun, books about girls in history, and I would just litter my classroom bookshelves with these books. And then I tried to start getting published. It took me about 6 years, John, to get published. 6 years of hundreds of rejection letters. The first books I had published were The Legend of the Teddy Bear with Sleeping Bear Press, which is a illustrated picture book about how the teddy bear got its name, and it has to do with Teddy Roosevelt. And the next book was right around the same time, was a book about Ben Franklin and how he did these magic squares. That's a Random House book. Magic squares are math puzzles. Any way you add the numbers across, down, or diagonally, it equals the same sum. So most of my books early on, in fact, all of my books early on were all either historical fiction or biographical books. Most of my books are with Random House. They were easy readers. I did those for years. And then I reunited with Sleeping Bear Press, and started a series called the Like You series. The first book was A Boy Like You, and Charnaie has collaborated with me on 2 of those books. And that's a little bit part of the story about how we met. But I wanted to write a story about a skater named Saria Bonali, and that book's called Fearless Heart. And I wrote a short poem about her. And she, in the 1998 Olympics, is a French skater, black skater who, in the landscape of ice skating, there's not a lot of black folks skating. So in her time, she experienced a lot of resistance and probably some racism too, definitely some racism. And I heard her story on NPR. I was sitting in the car, listening to an NPR story about her, and I remembered her. I said, you know what, this is interesting. Let me write a little bit about her. I wrote a poem about her, and then I said, you know, I need to turn this poem into a picture book. So I turned it into free verse narrative text with a picture book in mind, and I hunted her down and found her, and she collaborated with me and wrote the story, and that's how I got connected with Triumph. I had known about Triumph, just like you had mentioned, John, they're mostly just adult books about sports, but they had 2 or 3 alphabet books that they were for kids. So then I said, let's try Triumph for this Saria Bonali story, and they accepted it. And then I thought to myself, I've always wanted to write about Joe, and we can talk a little bit more about Joe later, but I had this idea that, Triumph would want to do it, and they love the idea of getting this story out there about Joe's life, because I've known about Joe since I was in high school. In the 80s, I followed him, I collected his cards, even though I'm an Eagles fan. Last year was rough for me with the Chiefs and the Eagles. And I needed a partner for this book. I needed some different perspective, and Charnaie's really one of my go-to co-authors. So it was a great fit, and Charnaie will unpack a little bit about her life and how she was the perfect fit for this book. She brings a really unique perspective to this book.
Yeah, thank you so much, Frank. And that was so interesting. I didn't know that part about you writing the blank books for your second graders, like all those years ago. So that was just amazing to find out. So thank you. Yes, so I'm Charnaie Gordon, and my journey is very different from Frank's. I will say that Frank and we did meet at a book fair, like a book conference in New York City. This was years ago. And we ended up meeting because I ended up sharing one of his books on my social media platform. So that just kind of sets the stage for how we met. But my story in the children's KidLit space kind of happened. It wasn't something that I was actually trying to do. I started with my blog in 2015, where I was just talking about children's books. About 2 years in, I decided to niche down and just focus primarily on diverse children's books. And at the time, I was working a full-time job as a computer programmer, and I was really just doing my blog as a side passion project. Fast forward, I decided to get a little bit more serious about my blog, turn it into a business. I was making money from it without even really intentionally trying to. And then in 2019, I got my first book contract. Publishers actually just reached out to me. My first book was with Frank. It was A Friend Like You. I co-authored that with Frank, and that was with Sleeping Bear Press. And then from there, I just kept getting offers from publishers. So my story is very different. I wasn't actively writing manuscripts. I was actually approached by publishers, and that's how I kind of got put on the map. And one day I shared one of Frank's books. It was actually A Boy Like You. And I tagged Frank in the post on Instagram. And then that's literally how we connected. We just started sharing messages back and forth. And then eventually we ended up meeting at a book conference in New York. And that's how we got connected. When I heard about Joe's story from Frank, I hadn't heard about Joe Delaney prior to Frank telling me about him. But when I heard about the story, I immediately said, yes, I'm interested. Especially when I heard how tragically Joe ended up passing away because he didn't know how to swim. And that hit home for me because as an adult, I still hadn't learned how to swim. So when Frank approached me about this book, I still didn't know how to swim. And it was during the process of us actually writing the book that I decided to use this book as my testimony. And I said, you know what? I'm going to sign up for swimming lessons and I am going to learn to swim. Joe's story inspired me so much. I took swimming lessons. It was really hard at first. But now I can proudly say that I know how to swim thanks to Frank, for introducing me to Joe. And then, of course, thank you to Joe Delaney and his inspiring story and his life and his legacy.
And I'm really grateful and excited to be able to share about Joe's story and unfortunately his timely passing. One of the things that I did want to mention before we do that is that it's interesting how the both of you come from two different walks of life. It's almost like whether you're a children's author or you're a football player. Sometimes you're the Heisman Trophy winner that can become a top 5, top 10 NFL draft pick. And then there's times where you, if one of the players that comes to mind is NFL Hall of Famer Kurt Warner, who before he led the St. Louis Rams to the Super Bowl, he was stocking groceries, and he was in NFL Europe, if I'm not mistaken, as well too. So our paths are very unique, and they always intersect with the right people at the right time, which is always fascinating as well too. In the world of KidLit, in the realm of professional football, in the realm of life, we can experience challenges, difficulties, obstacles, problems, stressors, troubles, worries, you name it. I always alphabetize those because they always kind of have like the same energy, right? It's kind of like wah, wah, wah. And you want to be right up here, like, hooray. You want to be like, choirs of angels and the heavens opening up and all of that. Specifically speaking, whether it be, if you want to share when you were first getting into the KidLit space, as well as working together on this book, we always love providing some inspiration for our listeners and viewers, our friends and neighbors, and of course, our fellow shining stars, because whether you, especially if you're doing something for the first time, if you're writing your first children's book, if you're becoming a parent for the first time, if you're taking swimming lessons for the first time, you can always experience these things because we are human and we can have our own fears and anxieties and insecurities. So Charnaie, starting off with yourself, what were some of the specific challenges of note that you experienced along the way? And what were some of the things that helped you to get through to the other side of those? And then Frank, to you on that question as well.
Yeah, it's such a great question because, as I said, I always knew that I wanted to write a book. I knew that I wanted to do this someday. But I always thought that I'd be writing my first book when I was retired and, much older in life. And never did I even have the idea to become a children's book author. But then when I was posed with the question and I gave it some thought, at first I was apprehensive because I was like, wait, I don't have any training in this. I'm not a writer. I'm not an author. But then I gave myself some time to like really sit with it and think about it. And then I thought, well, wait a minute. I am a writer. I can do this. Like I have been blogging at the time. I had been blogging for nearly 5 years. And so I said, yes, I am a writer and I will do this. But I think just, overcoming the initial, just that first initial gut feeling like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing. I've never done this before. That was really hard. And again, that I felt that too with when I signed up for swimming lessons. I had never really swam in a pool before on my own. And it's just the fear that you just kind of feel. And it just takes a lot to kind of overcome it. And you just have to say, you know what? I'm just gonna do this. I'm just gonna do this. And that was the hardest part for me. Anytime I start something new, there's always a little bit of apprehension involved. And I think that always stops a lot of people from actually getting started and doing the thing that they really want to do, but then they're like not sure. So I think for me, that is always the biggest thing, is just that initial trying to get over it. But once you just make up your mind and say, I'm just going to do it, sometimes it's not as bad as you actually think.
And Frank, to you on that question as well?
Yeah, as Charnaie was talking, I was thinking about a lot of things. I was thinking about our first conversation, Charnaie, in New York, and I told you that you were going to be a star when I met you, because she's pretty humble, John. Her Instagram site is probably the leading. She's definitely the leading book influencer on Instagram. She's sort of like the Oprah of Instagram with regard to children's books, especially about diversity. She's just too humble to say that. So, and when I first met her on Instagram and then in New York, her following wasn't as big. I don't remember how many followers you had but I think it might have been under 100,000 at that time. But now she's somewhere 300, 400, 500,000 followers. So I was thinking about when she was talking about how she was apprehensive, and she was at first, but I know I pushed and prodded her to do it because I knew she had it in her too. I'm not going to take all the credit, but I know she has her family supporting her, and she just has that grit anyway. And I was thinking about something else, John. So, writing a kid's book, people think it's easy. Everybody thinks they can do it, but it's difficult, and it's really hard. The average children's book author makes about $10,000 a year, and it's a really small percentage of folks who get published, who get a contract from a publisher. So like I said, 6 years, hundreds of rejection letters. What I did was I just had grit, and I just kept plugging through, and I realized that my writing wasn't that great at first. I thought it was good. I read kids' books a lot, but I had to learn. So it takes humility. It's humble. So it's humbling to get rejection letters, but each rejection letter made me better, and it made me get focused. And then when I started getting rejection letters that gave me advice and suggestions, that's when I started to get better. And then I realized I need to network here, and I need to make myself better by going to conferences. So I went to a lot of conferences, and conferences brought me some luck too, because my first contract came from going to a Manhattan Series Tuesday night conference. I wasn't going to go. I'm like, oh, you know what? Heck, I'll go. I'll take the train up there. And I sat there it was me and a bunch of retired librarians trying to get published, listening to some editors. And the editors who came were from Random House. They weren't even supposed to be there that night, but they knew who I was, John, because I had submitted a book about Ben Franklin, and they liked it. And then they liked me, and I asked informed questions, and they took a shot on me. They said, "We know you're young as a writer, but could you do this for us?" And they had me help them with a book they were writing with my second graders, and then that connection helped me, and I just got better. And I've been teaching my kids this mantra. It's a really good mantra to live by. Things don't get easier. You get better at handling hard things and difficult things. And it's really true. So every book that we write is difficult at first. Charnaie and I have done this 3 times together. And when we start out, it's sort of tough at first. You heard of writer's block, right? I mean, we all get it. It's well, where do we go here? Where do we go there? I've collaborated with my wife, Carla, on A Girl Like You. Her and Charnaie have been my 2 best collaborators because it's easy with them. The other collaborators have been great too. But it gets easier each time. And with Charnaie, she is a writer, and she's written on her own. She's had some really successful books just writing on her own. So, kids' books are tough. Charnaie and I get probably 3, 4, 5, 10 messages a month. Hey, can you help me write a kid's book? I have an idea. And my stock response is, that's an idea. You have to write the story first. You got to sit down and write it. And then you have to be willing to take editing, revising, waiting weeks to maybe re-revise it, re-edit it, and then take the risk to send it out. A lot of folks don't even try. They don't send it out because they're afraid of the rejection. And it takes a lot of rejection sometimes to get through. Very few authors get published sending their first manuscript in. So with regard to writing, it's just a lot of perseverance and that mindset of having a growth mindset. You got to get better.
I can sense and feel from the both of your responses that in many respects that you're carrying on Joe's memory and legacy just by being you, by being heroic in your own ways, by being humble in your own ways. And that's really important as well too, because especially in life, we can be very high and mighty and look at me and I have the Instagram following or the X following or the Facebook following. And when you realize the fact that life is fleeting, that life is very fragile, and that is, we'll be talking a little bit more momentarily about how Joe tragically lost his life in the process. We're grateful to all of you, our listeners and viewers, our friends and neighbors, and of course, our fellow shining stars who are joining us here for episode number 197 of the Children's Book Spotlight series. We are joined by the co-creators of the brand new children's book, Heroic Heart, The Legacy of a Professional Football Player, an illustrated biography of Joe Delaney, courtesy of our friends and neighbors at Triumph Books. It is now available. We encourage all of you to head on over to Amazon.com if that is your preferred online vehicle of your choosing, and leave a 5-star review for Heroic Heart. That is one of the many ways that you can pledge your support for Charnaie and for Frank, to let them know that they're doing wonderful and much needed work for children, parents, families, educators, and for those who love great children's books. For all of you who are educators and you're doing your part to be able to fill your school year with author school visits during 2024, we've also included Frank's and Charnaie's official websites in the description below so that you can connect with the both of them again to schedule your author school visits for 2024. And we always like to say, we like to make that kind recommendation. So if you head out to your favorite local library, your favorite children's or independent bookstore, and they do not stock their copy of Heroic Heart, give that kind recommendation. Let them know that you heard about the story on the Children's Book Spotlight series with myself and Little Forrest, and that you feel that they should stock Heroic Heart in the process. Because again, those are just some of the many ways that not only we can support Frank and Charnaie, but to also keep the memory of Joe alive. And it's a sad story. And normally one of our favorite times during an episode here on the Children's Book Spotlight series is when we crack the cover and we dive into the pages of the story. I'm still excited to do that, even though it's obviously a little bit of a somber tone, so to speak. I'm sure that there's many people who are tuning into the program that say, I'm familiar with Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, but who is Joe Delaney? And again, especially for all of the football players that came before who paved the way for the Patrick Mahomeses and the Travis Kelces and even on the flip side, the Brock Purdys of the world. It's up to us to be custodians of these particular people's lives and careers and missions as well, too. So, Frank, can you share with us about Joe? And because one of the great things about this book is that you have the endorsement of the Delaney family, and their thumbprint and their heartprint are literally felt throughout the book. You can really feel the Delaney family's essence throughout the whole story as well, too. So I'm really glad to hear that everyone was on board for this, for the highest and greatest good. Could you share with us a little bit more about Joe's journey, and what are some of the things that children and parents and families and educators and even newer football fans will be able to learn about when they crack the cover, when they read Heroic Heart?
I'll start by saying, talking about my personal journey with him. I was a junior in high school in the summertime. I was going into my senior year. And I don't remember where I heard it first. I either read it in Sports Illustrated, or I think I actually saw Dan Rather on the news talking about it when he had passed tragically. And that was the summer of '83. So he was the AFC Rookie of the Year in 1981 for the Kansas City Chiefs. And this is all I knew about him. I used to collect his cards. I have a card right here. It's one of the cards I just recently bought. I don't have the old ones, but I collected his cards back then. So 1981, AFC Rookie of the Year, team MVP. Second year, there was a strike-shortened season, if folks remember that. He only played a few games. He had a detached retina. And a week before training camp, the summer of '83, 1 week before, he went to a festival. There were like 3,000 people there. It was a kids festival. And I don't know if we want to talk about it yet, but that's where the story sort of ends in a way. His life before that was amazing, though, and I did research on him. 20 years ago, I started writing about Joe, and it took me 20 years to get published. I stopped. I didn't always try, but I had written about him years ago. In fact, I don't know if I told you this, Charnaie, recently, and I'm telling you, John, for the first time. About 2 months ago, I was going through some old rejection letters, and I found a few rejection letters for the Joe Delaney story from other publishers. So the timing wasn't right then. What's that, Charnaie?
You didn't tell me about that.
Yeah. I wish I had it here. It's really cool to see. And I was young when I was writing that. So, I didn't at the time write it as a free verse narrative poem. And Saria's story inspired me to do it that way first. And then I started writing, and I didn't finish it. I didn't write it in this way. When Charnaie and I started collaborating, we found out even more things, John, about his life. So the more and more we dug in, even right up until the end, about 2 months before, we found out some more information about him that we hadn't found out. His life was amazing. There's so many things to talk about. It's the way he died was heroic, but the way he lived was heroic too, John. He was completely selfless. He would get, his $11,000 check, which now the checks are way bigger. But back then, John, he'd get an $11,000 check from the Chiefs, come home and give the whole check to his wife and say, "This is for you and the kids. Just give me $5 so I can go to the corner store and get a soda pop." He mowed the lawn of a little old lady who lived down the street from him every week. He's a big famous NFL star. He would get all the boys in the neighborhood barbershop haircuts every month or two. He paid for the funeral of one of his former teachers. He hooked up his high school team in high school with a gym and with uniforms and helmets. He was a really selfless person and a really kind guy, and I think every player on the team loved him. There is an ESPN 30 for 30 short documentary about him, and you can find other documentaries about him through Chiefs Kingdom on YouTube. But the 30 for 30 about him is a short 30 for 30. Are you familiar, John, with the 30 for 30s?
I am, yes. I think that there was one about the Buffalo Bills and their 4 Super Bowl losses. So I am
that's a rough
familiar with
watch.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a shorter one, and you can probably see it on YouTube. But I don't know how much right now we want to talk about it. But I don't want to give too much of the book away before we crack open the cover. But that's his life, and his life is, look how inspiring it was to Charnaie, right? And it has been to Charnaie to go out and learn how to swim. And we got to give props to the illustrator, Anastasia McGlure-Williams. She did a beautiful job, and he has an interesting connection too. When she was a young kid, she was saved from drowning also. So that's another amazing connection. But it's sort of how Joe's story works in kids and in people that matters the most. His story is one that we can put up on a pedestal, but that's not what it's meant for, really, with all the trophies. It's really about how it works in you. And I think it touches people a lot. A lot of people who have read it have told me, wow, I was crying at the end. I never knew this. And then some people are like, I remember this story, but I didn't know he lived that kind of life. I just thought he was a football player.
And Charnaie, it's really interesting because in many respects, athletes to a certain extent can get a bad rap. It's very easy to think that athletes are entitled and spoiled and they're egotistical. And don't get me wrong, there's a fair share of those athletes that are out there. And I think it's still safe to say that I think the term is called bling, right? They wear the bling around their neck, and it's just all about, it's about the me and not the we. And one of the things that I really loved about the work that all of you landed up working on together, and yes, props up to Anastasia, who did a tremendous job with the illustrations. We really can see in illustrated form how Joe was about the we instead of the me. As we're cracking the cover, can you share, maybe like 1 or 2 specific things on that thread of, when I say that Joe was about the we versus the me, what comes to mind specifically? I know that Frank, alluded to a couple of those things, but is there anything else that you wanted to complement with in the process?
No, nothing. I think Frank covered it all. I mean, definitely the family, though. Family was huge for Joe. And so I just think he was just a great dad. He was a great husband. That's what really touched me, is how selfless he was with his family. And then, as Frank was saying, with his neighbors, and then ultimately, tragically with his death, to those 3 boys at the lake that day. That's the ultimate sacrifice. And if that doesn't show you how selfless he was, I don't know what will. But when I learned about Joe's story, I was just so touched, just by his kindness. Obviously he was an amazing football player, but then, just how selfless he was, it really touched me.
And it could be very easy to say that Joe came from a different time. It's very easy to say that, and there is some truth to that. Back in the 70s and 80s, maybe things were, our society was not as obviously there was no social media back then. We didn't necessarily have to keep checking our phones. We, in many respects, we could leave our doors unlocked, right, and just take the time and be with family and friends and just enjoy the space and enjoy the silence. And now we're in this society where it's like we feel that every 5 minutes we have to be doing something or posting something on social media. And I had no idea about Joe's life, and longtime football fan on mine of things. I started watching football probably around, I'd say 87, 88. So right around the time when the Buffalo Bills, shortly after they drafted Bruce Smith, and and Jim Kelly. And just so I have had the chance to kind of study over the years a little bit about the NFL and some of its players, but I had no idea about Joe. And we talk about the stories within the story. And I feel that even though that Joe's life was cut short, he lived a full life. And the fact that, again, we're able to even just see snapshots of that, undoubtedly, there has been tremendous feedback that you've been receiving, whether it be from former Kansas City Chiefs, whether it be members of the Chiefs Kingdom, being a longtime member of the Bills Mafia. With all due respect to the Chiefs fans out there, it's difficult for me to say the phrase Chiefs Kingdom, but they're very loyal. And even just from those within the KidLit community, there's different people from different walks of life that have learned about this story. What has been the feedback and the response that you have been receiving, whether it be from those within the Chiefs organization, whether it be within those who are within the NFL community, those who are football fans, those who are in the KidLit community, from parents, from educators? Is there something specific that comes to mind that you'd like to be able to share, Frank, starting off with yourself with that question?
Well, first, Gene Willis was really great. Gene Willis works with GEHA, and they're the name on Arrowhead Stadium, and they're a healthcare organization, I guess headquartered in Kansas City. And if you remember Charnaie, I don't know if you were on that call with us, he told us stories about his own life and the Chiefs and his experience with swimming. And Charnaie can speak to that later. But he's one person. I haven't heard from any Kansas City Chiefs, but I know the Chiefs and the YMCA and GEHA are working closely with the Delaney 37 Foundation and in that area they're charged with helping kids learn how to swim, and folks who don't have access to swimming lessons learn how to swim. So the book came out, in October, Charnaie?
Yes.
Yeah. So I haven't heard anything from Chiefs. Heck, I would love if Taylor Swift got a hold of the book, right? Or Travis Kelce. That would be great, because that would, not even just for the sales, but for, just awareness to get the book out there. There have been no books written about Joe. And I'm really happy. I think we both are, Charnaie and I, and Anastasia and Triumph, that this is the first book written about him, and it's a kid's book, because I'd like to say that even though this is a kid's book, I think all picture books, especially picture books like this that are text heavy and, they have a lot of good back matter in it, information at the back, that it's really for all people. And especially this book. And Triumph, when we first wrote this book, Triumph struggled a little bit with, so there's not many kids' books that focus on this kind of thing happening, and the way that it happened, that he perished. So we had to be really careful and delicate with the way that we wrote it, the way that it was, the way that Anastasia illustrated. So we really took our time with that. And when I go to schools, and Charnaie goes too, I'm careful about reading it to really young kids. I'd rather see their parents or grown-ups read it with them. Second, third grade's pretty good. But every time I've read it, the response I care about most is schools, John. When I go into schools, kids, they sort of become Chiefs fans, some of them, right? And I'm in Eagle country, and it's like, they're like, wow, and they want one of these Joe Delaney shirts that we had made, and, they're just inspired by him. It's really been powerful. And then teachers just are like, they're in tears about it. It's a really powerful story. Let me just say this real quick, because I didn't do a good job of it before, John. I don't know how much we're going to get into the book, but do you want me to talk about the day he perished or no?
Please do.
So that day in 1983, I think it was July. It's escaping me right now, but the dates don't really matter. But he went to this kids festival, and he drove off. And this is something that didn't make the book. I don't know if you know this, Charnaie. His wife talked about this later, that he left and came back and kissed them goodbye again. And then he left and he came back again and kissed them again. And I think he did it 3 times. It's almost like he had this feeling that he wasn't going to return. So he went to this festival and he was there. And there's conflicting stories about whether he was sitting or playing softball, but there were about 3,000 people there. And there was a man-made pond that the folks who organized this had made for like a water slide or something like that. And there were no signs. And 3 young boys went in to swim. African-American boys went in to swim, and they started drowning. And there was only one person who went in to save them, and it was Joe. And Joe didn't really know how to swim. He could maybe tread water a little bit and doggy paddle, but he was not a strong swimmer in any way. Some reports you'll see John say that he couldn't swim at all, but he basically he couldn't swim. He wasn't a strong swimmer. He went in and he got one kid out, and then he went back in. That kid survived. He went back in to get the other two kids and never came up. And then Marvin Dearman was the police officer who came on the scene as a scuba diver, and there were other police there. And like you said, back then there were no cell phones. There was one witness that when Joe ran in, he handed a woman his wallet and said, I'll be back, hold this, I'm going in. And again, I'm going to accentuate the point that 3,000 people there, and he was the only one who went in and didn't know how to swim to try to save these boys. So when Marvin Dearman showed up, he went in and he recovered one of the boys. They tried to revive him back at the hospital. He passed away. And then he went in and got the other boy out. He had passed away, I think, on the scene. And then he took all his scuba diving equipment off. And then a police officer said, wait, there's someone else in the water. No one had told him, Marvin Dearman, this. And he got it back on. It took a couple of minutes. He went in. As soon as he went back in, he found Joe. And they tried to revive Joe. They took him to the hospital, and he passed away that day. And I've seen interviews with Marvin Dearman. He was instrumental in renaming that park, the Delaney Park. He always struggles with, if he had just known that there was a grown-up, an adult in the water, he wouldn't have taken his scuba diving stuff off. So he seems like a great guy. He's still around, and I know he's really involved with the family. So it's an amazing story. And when Carolyn, his wife, got the call, she's like, I don't understand this call. Joe isn't supposed to be around water. There's no way he could have drowned.
And it really puts into perspective, and thank you for sharing, especially the end of Joe's life, because it's, even though it's difficult to be able to share and difficult to be able to listen, it's the heart of the heroic heart. It is the heroic deed that Joe felt that he needed to do. And in many respects, not to have this conversation sound very morbid and just we're all talking about death and the end of life, but it's just like, when we think about it as fellow human beings, fellow neighbors, fellow souls, right? That ultimately we all will transition. We all will pass away. And one of the most heroic things that you can do is lay down your life for someone else's. And the fact that Joe was, he was this way, not even just in that moment. He was that way. His heart led the way with everything that he did. And it's important, even though, again, the story is a little bit of a sad story, we need to be reminded that there's good people in the world right now. Because again, no matter what side of the aisle that you're on, no matter what media outlet that you may watch, it could look like the world's going to hell. And, so we need more kindness. We need more heroic hearts that are in the world. We're beginning to wind down our time with our featured guests here on episode number 197 of the Children's Book Spotlight Series, the co-creators of the new children's book, Heroic Heart, Frank Murphy, Charnaie Gordon. We encourage all of you, again, our listeners and viewers, our friends and neighbors, and of course, our fellow shining stars, to head on over to Amazon.com if that is your preferred online vehicle of your choosing. One of the many ways you can pledge your support for Frank and for Charnaie is to leave a 5-star review on Amazon for Heroic Heart. That lets them know that they're doing wonderful and much needed work for children, parents, families, educators, and for those who love great children's books. Of course, as well, be sure to make that kind recommendation. We do a little tip of the cap when we say kind recommendation to your favorite local librarian, your favorite children's or favorite independent bookstore. Let them know that they should stock Heroic Heart, because this isn't just a football story. This isn't just a Kansas City themed story. It's something that we can really all resonate with, the importance of having a heroic heart. So when you head on over to your favorite local library, favorite children's or favorite independent bookstore in the process, if you don't see that they stock Heroic Heart, make that kind recommendation that they do. And for all educators across the country, Kansas City and beyond, if you want to schedule your author school visit with Frank and Charnaie in 2024, we've included their official websites in the description below. One of the things that we love to do, both Charnaie and Frank, is to provide useful and supportive tips, tools, and strategies for parents, educators, caregivers, grandparents, to really extract after watching a children's book spotlight series episode and really put it into their own lives, because of course kids model what it is that we do, so that children can be able to implement whatever the thing or things are in their own lives as well too. And we're huge fans of Mr. Rogers. In case you weren't aware of that, here at the Children's Book Spotlight series and PR from the Heart, he's a very big inspiration for us. And he was always about helping your fellow neighbor in need. Now, necessarily speaking, we're not encouraging anyone to jump into swimming pools and your life right now. There's different ways that you can help other people. And I think, again, this is something that it may seem simple. It may seem something like, a fifth grader's telling us to have this conversation, but the kids are reminding us that we need to be able to do this. So starting off with yourself, what are some of the things that we can do, especially now in 2024, moving forward, to be able to be more heroic hearts in the world, to be able to have that fabric? And I feel with that being shared, we have that within us. It's just a matter of, dissolving the noise and, not doing the things that prevent us from being who we truly are at our core. So what are some of the things that come to mind when it comes to how we can be more like Joe, but in our own way, keeping our own trail blazing while keeping his own memory and legacy alive in the process?
Charnaie, I'll pass the ball to you. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I think it really comes down to just kindness, and absolutely having empathy for others. Those are like the two biggest things that comes to mind. And it might sound simple, but I just think we are missing a lot of kindness in this world today. Even when you look at social media, people just feel like they can go on someone's page and in the comments and say whatever they want to say, and without really thinking about, like, hey, there's a human person behind this account, and they have feelings. They're human just like you, and their feelings are valid, right? All feelings are valid. I just think that kindness is a big part of what's missing in the world today. But if I can go back to your previous question too, and just talk about things that I've heard from others who have read the book, Heroic Heart. The best story that I have is that a few women, specifically Black women, have reached out to me and asking me how to learn to swim. They read the back matter in the book. We had one woman who was very outspoken about it. She did a whole post on Instagram. She signed up for swimming lessons, and I was kind of like her coach. I was texting her, we exchanged numbers. We talked on the phone a couple of times, and she was very nervous about starting swimming lessons. And I just kind of coached her through it. And I said, you know what? You can do this. If I can do it, you can do it too. And she now knows how to swim. So I've had like a couple of stories like that, where women, specifically Black women, who just never learned how to swim. And in the back matter of the book, I talk about my experience about not learning how to swim as a child. For a lot of Black children, it's just not something that we learn how to do when we're smaller, mainly because we don't have access to pools. And that might seem like a small thing to some people, but it was true for me. Like, the nearest pool was like the YMCA, but my parents weren't members of the Y. We didn't have a membership. We couldn't afford to have a membership. And so I just never learned how to swim. So that's the case for a lot of Black children, unfortunately, especially in America. And it was just so powerful for me to be able to coach. I think it was like 3 different women that reached out to me wanting to learn how to swim, and they were just inspired by my story and by Joe's story. So that, that was me being selfless, right? Just like Joe, being kind, showing these women like, hey, you can do this too. And I think if we had more people in the world doing stuff like that willingly, the world would be just a better place.
Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing.
I would say. Sorry, John.
Well, I was just going to mention is that just it all really begins with just having that compassionate heart and that kind ear. Oftentimes people just need someone. At our core, we want to be heard, seen, felt, acknowledged, appreciated, loved, respected, etc. And it just begins with creating that space for that other person. As we talked about, like we live in a very busy society, and there's times where we need to unbusy ourselves so that we can realize like we're all here for a greater purpose other than just, acquiring things and possessions and succeeding and getting these bells and whistles. We're here for a bigger purpose. Would you like to be able to share your response to that, Frank?
Well, to piggyback on that and a little bit what Charnaie said and what you would ask. So what's an activity that parents and grown-ups and teachers and librarians could do with kids? It's really teaching them to get to think about being intentional, asking people their stories and then listening. Listening is an act of love, right? I teach my students and the kids I've coached, that you have to lead and live with kindness. And that's what Joe did. The way Joe died is the way he lived. That's what's important. And that's really what we wanted to amplify. A lot's been written and talked about with him in documentaries. And the documentaries did a good job about, amplifying his life. But we really want this picture book to amplify the way he lived his life. And he did it. He led and lived with kindness in small places, little small places like that little old lady's yard, right? And we allude to this in the book. He was the one player, and an NFL locker room is really big, right? So it's got, over 50 people, all these coaches. He was the one guy who made sure he got to know everyone. He loved everyone. Everyone loved Joe, He was this good old boy they talked about. He talked really fast. He had that Southern drawl, but he was a magnet, and he just made people feel great, and he elevated people around him. And it's really just trying to teach kids that by his example to live and lead with kindness in small places intentionally.
That's actually one of my favorite words too, is because really in life, it's about, we can just do things for the sake of doing them. But when we take the time to do things from a space of intention, then we know that we're doing things for the right reasons. And just to be able, it even gives us the time to slow down and say, okay, is what it is that I'm about to do, is it heartfelt? Is it intentional? Is it just, to more of an egotistical kind of thing? And we're all human beings. Like we always have that little ego that comes in and says, put the me before the we, right? But it's just important that we take that time to be more intentional in the process. I'm really glad that this story is being shared out in the world, because, it's very easy to look at the story and say, well, Joe was a former football player. He played 40 years ago. And, what does it have to do with the price of tea in China today? And in many respects, quite a bit. And again, I feel very fortunate over the past 5 years here with the Children's Book Spotlight series and being one of the most popular children's book podcasts in the world of children's literature, being able to be a custodian for many stories. And this is where it's just like, again, if we can do our part to make sure that someone didn't die in vain, and to be able to pass along their story, to keep their memory, their legacy alive, that's ultimately important. Because as you mentioned, Charnaie, I'm sure that I can admit, I've thought about taking swimming lessons. I took swimming lessons as a child, getting deep and vulnerable with the both of you here. So I took swimming lessons. I forget what age I was, 7, 8 years old back in Buffalo. And of course I had a fear of the deep end, and I stopped. And last summer, the idea came to mind about like, okay, I think there's something healing about moving through your fear. And it could be like, ultimately, it may not necessarily be the fear of swimming, but it could just be the fear of doing that thing you don't want to do, the fear of going to the deep end, whatever that deep end represents, whether it be writing that children's book, whether it be starting a family, whether it be opening up a business, or all of the above, so to speak. And this is just another one of those little nudges from the universe, so to speak, that says, yeah, I live in San Diego. I really want to be able to enjoy the water even more, if you know what I'm saying. One of the two ways that we close out our children's book spotlight series episodes, we felt his spirit. In addition to Joe's spirit, we felt the spirit of our late friend and neighbor, Mr. Rogers, of course, the host of the long-running children's television program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. In many respects, he did this in different ways. Through his time on the Neighborhood, when he spoke across the country at college talks, commencement speeches, most notably when he received his Lifetime Achievement Award at the Daytime Emmy shortly before he passed from stomach cancer. And he always kept the time, Frank. He always kept the time, Charnaie, whether it be 15 seconds, 30 seconds, or a full minute. He encouraged us to remember those who helped love us into being. And that was his way of saying, remember those heroic hearts along your path that reminded you of your worth, of your value, that reminded you that like their heroic heart was like a reflection of what you are, what you have within you. Frank, starting off with yourself, who are some of the people that you would like to publicly recognize here on episode number 197 of the Children's Book Spotlight series that helped love you, Frank Murphy, into being?
Way too many people to think about. My wife's sitting in the other room. She's listening, but I would say this anyway. My wife, Carla, she's a pediatric nurse. She's dedicated her life to helping kids. And I said, like, she wrote A Girl Like You with me. My stepdaughter, Haley, she's studying to be a teacher. My sons, Griffin and Chase. Griffin is 25 and Chase is 24. And I want to parenthetically insert in here that we should have mentioned this. Joe was only 24 years old when he passed. People see pictures of him. He seems like he looked older, but he was 24. He was the age of my youngest son. So all the kids I've taught, new friends that I have, co-authors that I have, I'm really thankful for Charnaie. She's made me a better writer. She's just she's a force of nature. I always tell her that. My mom isn't here anymore. My mom shaped me and my dad. My mom passed away in 1998. She was my best friend all the years that she was alive. My dad's still alive. He's a great help. My sister Kathleen, friends I've met. There's authors I want to work with. I am planning to write a book with Bo Nickel, who's a UFC fighter. He's a college wrestler at Penn State. Do you know who Bo Nickel is, John, or no?
I'm sometimes better with faces than names. The name doesn't ring a bell, but the face may.
Yeah, so we're flirting with the idea of writing a book together. There's other people I want to write books with too. I want to do another one with Charnaie. We're talking about doing a title called, and this is perfect for your question, A Love Like Yours. It'll be in this series that we have right now. So I probably miss people, but those are the people I would say the most.
And Charnaie, who are some of those who have helped love you into being that you'd like to publicly recognize here on episode number 197 of the Children's Book Spotlight series?
Yes, so many people come to mind, but the first person that comes to mind, obviously, is my mom. She's still alive, thankfully. My dad, who is no longer alive, unfortunately, may he rest in peace. I would have to definitely say my grandmother, my Nana, who she's no longer with us either. My sister, my husband, Barrington for sure, and then our two children, Madison, she is 11, and our son Barrington the third, he is 10. So and then of course, people like Frank, so many people that I have encountered over the years during my KidLit journey, way too many to name. So I'll stop there. But I did also want to say, wasn't it Mr. Rogers who said, always look for the helpers?
Yep.
Yeah. So I definitely want to thank Frank for being my helper in this space during this season of my life. He has been a huge inspiration to me. Always excited to collaborate and work with him, and just grateful for this opportunity.
And John, I want to say one more thing too. I want you to know this because I didn't get to sign your book, John, but I'll send you books that are signed. I write in every book. I inscribe in every book, Love Prevails, next to my name. And in the book, on the flap, it says, Love dared Joe to care for everyone, from teammates to friends to families to strangers, right up to his final act on this earth. The most enduring lesson we can learn from Joe is that love prevails, and it always will. So to me, that's the best message of Joe's life, that he knew how to love, he knew how to be loved, and love prevails. And it did that day for him, and it's still prevailing because, look, Charnaie learned how to swim. 3 other women learned how to swim. There's people learning how to swim. There's people hopefully living their lives a little bit more intentionally with kindness and leading with love and kindness because of Joe.
And I thank you very much for sharing, the both of you respectively. I believe Mr. Rogers, Fred, had said that no matter where those people are, if they're near or far, if they're still with us or they're watching down from heaven, that they're smiling, knowing that they made an indelible impact on your life, which is always a good feeling. We're also, in addition to huge Mr. Rogers buffs here at the program at the Children's Book Spotlighters, we're huge Disney fans, which of course the Disney magic always reminds us that we have the ability to bring to form and shape our dreams, our desires, our goals, our ambitions, and we have the opportunities to do that for those in our lives, those who we love, those who we care about, those who are blessed to serve in the process. We go back to the year 1992. The Bills were still in their Super Bowl run at that particular point in time. I think I was 11 years old, but we remember the late Robin Williams. We remember the Genie of the Lamp. And we always like to close out our program with a little segment called 3 Wishes. So yes, tried and true for nearly 200 trolley stops. This Genie lamp has gone with us wherever we go. I believe the only automatic disqualifiers are you can't make someone fall in love with you and you can't ask for more wishes. So Frank and Charnaie, the both of you are being given 3 wishes respectively. So technically the segment should be called 6 wishes, not 3 wishes, but you've given so freely to children, parents, families, educators, those who love great children's books all across the country and all around the world. So now is your time to receive. So Charnaie, what would your 3 wishes be?
I would say become a New York Times best-selling author at least one time. At least one time. I just want it once. I just want to hit that list once, or any of the lists. It doesn't have to be the Times. It could be any of those lists. Let's see what else. I want to have a big event. My big dream is to have a big event at the New York Public Library for children. Just fill it with children. And I guess another dream that I have, another wish, would probably be to get at least 2 more book contracts this year in 2024.
Cool.
There are your 3 wishes. And Frank, what would your 3 wishes be?
I'll stick with the theme of what Charnaie was saying and the theme of this. I want this book, because people ask me what's the most favorite book I've ever written. It's probably this one because of the long time that it took and how powerful that I think this book should be. I would love this book to get more recognition. And if I had to pick a book to be a New York Times bestseller, it would be Heroic Heart, for lots of reasons. Not to make money in any way, but instead to amplify Joe's story and to get it out there. And, I think his number's retired with the Chiefs. I know that. I think it's not officially retired, but I think he should be in the Hall of Fame. I remember Rick Riley, the Sports Illustrated writer, saying at the end of one of the ESPN documentary that, and you had alluded to this, John, about some of the athletes, how they can act sometimes. He actually used the word idiot. He said there's a lot of idiots in the 24/7, news cycle. And, but Joe wasn't one of those people, and Joe was probably the best person who ever played in the NFL. So if there could be a Hall of Fame for folks the people that they were, not just the players, he belongs in there. So wish number 1 would be that. Wish number 2 would be just for family and friends to be healthy and to live long, prosperous lives, a lot longer than Joe got to live. And you said he lived a full life, and he did. But that, and then third thing, selfishly, probably to retire in a couple years, and maybe one of these books will give me enough money to be able to have a house right on the beach and a house here near Philly, so I can have 2 places to go and just write. I still love teaching, but to be able to write and reach kids that way. I love writing. I love teaching leadership lessons. I'll throw a 4th one, and I hope the Sixers win the world championship in the NBA this year. So I'm a big Sixers fan, so that's what I want.
I believe that it's long since been said that if a wish comes from your heart, it has a greater chance of coming to fruition. So I appreciate the both of you sharing your respective wishes. As we hear the trolley, that means that it is time to go. But raise your hand if you have had fun. On episode number 197 of the Children's Book Spotlight Series, we see hands from Charnaie, hands from Frank, hands from myself. And we actually see paws up for Little Force. Now, if you're also movie fans, you remember back in the day, the beloved movie critic duo Siskel and Ebert, when they loved a film, they gave it 2 thumbs up. Well, maybe depending if you didn't love Siskel and Ebert, maybe they really weren't beloved. Maybe you kind of hated them, so to speak. But one of the fastest growing endorsements and recognitions for children's authors in the world of children's literature is when Little Force gives 2 paws up, and he has given 2 paws up for Heroic Heart, which again, it is now available. We encourage all of you, our listeners and viewers, our friends and neighbors, and of course, our fellow Shining Stars, to head on over to Amazon.com if that is your preferred online vehicle of your choosing. You can leave a 5-star review after purchasing and enjoying Heroic Heart. That's one of the many ways you can pledge your support for Frank and for Charnaie, to let them know that they're doing wonderful and much needed work for children, parents, families, educators, and those who love great children's books. Again, courtesy of our friends and neighbors at Triumph Books. For all educators out there, not only in Kansas City, but across the country, if you want to facilitate your author school visit with Frank and or Charnaie, you can connect with them via their official websites below, which we've provided their websites below in the description below as well too. And again, be sure to make that little tip of the cap, that kind recommendation. If you head your favorite local library, your favorite children's and or independent bookstore, and you do not see that they stock their copies of Heroic Heart, make that kind recommendation. Let them know that you heard about the story on the Children's Book Spotlight Series with myself and Little Force in the process, because again, this is one of the many ways that we can do our part to keep Joe Delaney's memory and legacy alive. And a beautiful, amazing poet who I had the opportunities to work with this past year. Her name is Wanda Weathersby. And I mention her name because she actually lost her son, Calvin, unexpectedly. And she wrote a popular poetry book called Say Their Name. And she believes that one of the many ways in which we can keep someone's memory and legacy alive is simply by saying their name. So every time that she goes out, she says her son's name proudly with love, Calvin. So we're doing our part to channel what Wanda has communicated with all of us, to be able to do that when it comes to keeping Joe Delaney's memory and legacy alive. But this has been a very heartfelt trolley stop. We hope that all of you enjoy the Super Bowl. But the countdown is now really on to episode number 200 of the Children's Book Spotlight Series. We are looking forward to these next several trolley stops to that ultimate benchmark. But fear not, there are many magical trolley stops to come. So if you are a children's author, if you are a middle grade author, and you would love to share your inspiring story and the release of your brand new children's book, just as Frank and Charnaie did here this week on the program, we encourage you to head over to our official website, prfromtheheart.com, or connect with us via any of our social media platforms that you now see on screen. Facebook, Instagram, and we like to refer to it as the artist formerly known as Twitter. For the love of us, we still can't refer to it as X. If you remember back in the day, Prince, there was the part of his life where he referred himself as the artist formerly known as Prince. It sounds much cooler to say I posted on the artist formerly known as Twitter today instead of I posted on X today. So again, you can connect with us via our social media platforms as well. This is truly one of the most exciting months in our 10-year history, as we're also celebrating not only the 200th episode of the Children's Book Spotlight Series, but the 3-year anniversary celebration of the Neighborly Reviews bookcast. If you zoom in your screen right over my shoulder, you remember him and you love him as the beloved Mr. McFeely on the popular long-running children's television program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. We know him and we love him as David Newell. We're going to be celebrating in just mere days the 3-year anniversary celebration of the Children's Book Spotlight Series. We are so grateful for it to have become one of the go-to destinations for parents, for educators, teachers, principals, and librarians across the country and around the world to be able to enjoy their heartfelt reviews of some of the new top children's books that are available on the market. So we're communicating that these resources of care are available. If you are a children's author and would love for David and I to share your brand new story, to review, a little tip of the cap again to his character, to review your brand new children's book on a forthcoming edition of the Neighborly Reviews Bookcast, you know where to connect with us. And of course, we have had the privilege and the honor of being of service to some of the top names in the world of children's literature, ranging from John Parra and Catherine Roy, all the way to those who are beginning their journey. As we are approaching the celebration of our 10th anniversary in just a few short months, if you are a children's author, if you are a middle grade author and would love for your journey to take flight in the form of a book media tour in a city of your choosing or a national book media tour, head on over to our official website, prfromtheheart.com, schedule your courtesy connection call, and let us see how we can be of service to you. One final time, head on over to Amazon.com if that is your preferred online vehicle of your choosing. Be sure to purchase, enjoy your copy of Heroic Heart, The Legacy of a Professional Football Player, an illustrated biography of Joe Delaney. It is now available. Again, one of the many ways that you can pledge your support for Frank and for Charnaie, to let them know that they're doing wonderful and much needed work for children, parents, families, educators, and those who love great children's books, is to leave a 5-star review on Amazon. Be sure, all educators out there, Frank and Charnaie, they truly have heroic hearts as well, too. They would give a great presentation at your school, great story times as well. So again, we do our part to be able to endorse the authors who make trolley stops here on the Children's Book Spotlight series. So if you are considering an author's school visit for your little ones, you can head on over to Frank's website. You can head on over to Charnaie's official website. We've included them in the description below. And again, that little tip of the cap as well, too. If you head on over to your favorite local library, favorite children's, favorite independent bookstore, you do not see their copy of Heroic Heart, don't necessarily jump to conclusions and think that they're not, Kansas City Chiefs fans, right? Just let them know that you heard about Heroic Heart here on the Children's Book Spotlight series with myself and Little Forrest. But again, we've heard the trolley, so that means that it is time to go. We want to, of course, encourage all of you, if you have enjoyed this trolley stop, if you've learned, every day in life we learn, and we learn every day, especially here through trolley stops here on the Children's Book Spotlight series. If this message, the message of Joe's life and what it is that he has left us, the importance of love and how love does prevail, being kind to your fellow neighbor. If you feel that this message needs to be shared with someone in need, if you haven't had the chance to do so, we're approaching 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. Head on over to our official YouTube channel and subscribe to not only the program, but of course you can subscribe to the official YouTube channel at PR From the Heart, because of course you could pledge your support for us in that way. Share this very special trolley stop that you have now enjoyed. That is episode number 197 of the Children's Book Spotlight series. We want to thank all of you for your continued support of PR From the Heart, for your continued support of children's authors, for your continued support of children's illustrators all across the country and all around the world, such as Frank and Charnaie, who are doing wonderful and much needed work for children, parents, families, and educators, and those who love great children's books, for your continued support of the Children's Book Spotlight series, for your continued support of local libraries and children's and independent bookstores, truly the pillars of our community. But above all else, we want to thank you for helping us to walk home the children of the world. One final time, his spirit has been with us in the process. Mr. Rogers, in many respects, in his own private numerology, is the result of him weighing 143 pounds throughout his whole entire natural adult life. That was his way of reminding us that he loved us. He did that, of course, every time on the neighborhood, every time that he encountered one of his fellow human beings. There's 1 letter in I, 4 letters in love, 3 letters in you. As Little Forrest and Frank and Charnaie were kind enough to spend some time with us here in our trolley stop here in our neighborhood here this week on episode number 197 of the Children's Book Spotlight series. As a little tip of the cap to our favorite neighbor, Mr. Rogers, we share our favorite 3 numbers, 243. There's 3 letters in love, 3 letters in we, 3 letters in, 2 letters in we, 4 letters in love, 3 letters in you. There's a lot of numbers, a lot of letters here, but that is our reminder that we see your inherent worth and we see your inherent value, that we like you, that we love you just the way that you are whole, healthy, complete. We like you. We love you just the way that you are. So for Little Forrest, who is now snoozing quietly, for Frank Murphy, for Charnaie Gordon, for myself, John Massalonis, thank you for spending some time with us here in our neighborhood at PR From the Heart. And we look forward to seeing you once again very soon as the countdown continues to episode number 200 of the Children's Book Spotlight series. Thank you for helping us to walk home the children of the world, our fellow friends, our fellow neighbors, and our fellow shining stars. Goodbye for now.